Hi guys, it's Jeff at Slavens Racing, and out here in my man cave doing a little social distancing, trying to stay sane during these crazy coronavirus days. And so I'm working on my 500 here, and I get a lot of questions about break-in and about oil changes on 4-strokes. So I get emails and phone calls about this, and I also see I don't spend much time on the internet on the chit-chat sites, but I do see guys asking that question once in a while. So this is my 2020 500, and I highly recommend you read your owner's manual. You know, it's got a lot of great information in there, and guys often email me and ask questions that are answered in the manual. You know, and I don't mind answering questions. I answer them all day, every day. I've been doing that for 48 years. I'm always glad to help. But it is pretty annoying when guys don't bother to read their manual and the questions they're asking me are in the manual. So, you know, please take a minute or two and read the manual. So I want to know about oil change, especially the first oil change. So right here, it says to change it after 1 hour of operation. And I'm good with that, but you got to be careful what you put back in after 1 hour of operation. So the oil that comes in the engine is a break-in oil, and that's designed, you know, break-in oils are designed to let the rings seat. So during break-in, you're breaking in the bearings, the crankshaft, the rod bearings, you know, the main bearings, and the bearings on the camshaft. You're also letting the cam followers break in, rocker arms, that kind of stuff. But the real main thing that you're trying to break in, because all those things kind of just break in on their own, is you're trying to break in the piston and rings, especially the rings. You want to make sure those rings seat. And sometimes I see guys at trailheads, and they've got a fairly new bike, and it's puffing a little smoke. I'm thinking, something went wrong during their break-in. So I hear guys post, or I see guys post all the time. Oh yeah, I did some heat cycles in my garage, and I putted around the neighborhood, this and that. So those are a total waste of time. Total waste of time. That's really old school stuff back when we had cast iron cylinders and poor quality piston and rings. These days with the Nickel coated cylinders, the better tolerances, the better materials, and all the components, that's a waste of time. If it makes you feel good, go right ahead and do it, but you're wasting your time. Now on a 2-stroke, it really is problematic because all you're doing is filling up the power valve and the exhaust pipe, the muffler packing with goo. So I highly recommend don't do that on a 2-stroke. The best way to break them in is just to ride them. And I'm not saying go out and rev the guts out of them, blast it up a sand wash at 5th gear pinned, or go do the earliest hill climbs you can find, anything like that. But just go for a nice casual trail ride, and you don't putt it all day long. Don't keep it down in those real low RPMs. The thing needs to, the engine and the cylinder and piston and rings need to expand and contract. So you need to rev it out some, and I'm not talking about hitting the rev limiter, but rev it out and then bring her down. Rev it out some, bring it down. And you don't have to do that every shift. Just use a little common sense, but just kind of ride it like you normally would on a trail ride, but skip the parts where you would be revving the guts out in a sand wash or something like that. So for the most part, just ride them. And I've been doing that forever, and my engines always look great when I tear them down to do a top end rebuild. And the factory guys, do you really think that they putt around and forever on their mega dollar factory bike? Hell no. The mechanic breaks it in a little bit, maybe out in the parking lot or in some field, or maybe he does a couple laps around the track. Then he hands it over to the to the factory boys, and they rev the guts out of them. You know, sometimes they do spend some time on dynos with them for break-in, but dynos are hard on engines. I mean, you don't put your engine on a dyno. It's putting the full strain on them. So just ride your bike. That's the best thing you can do. Just ride it. But let's get back to this engine oil. So it says change it after every 10 hours. And I kind of got sidetracked here. So I mentioned the break-in oil that's in them from the factory. That's designed to allow the rings to seat. So when you change that oil, if you put in a full synthetic, extremely slippery, slimy oil, the rings are not seated at that point, and they probably never will if you put in a full synthetic at that point. I mean, there's a good chance that they never will. So if you're changing that oil at 10 hours, put a break-in oil back in it. Bel-Ray makes a break-in oil. I believe we've got it on our site. There's some other ones out there, but basically break-in oils are a full 100% petroleum oil, and the synthetic blends are very slippery and don't allow the rings to seat very well. I'm not saying that they never do or whatever. I mean, there's going to be a gazillion exceptions. You don't need to leave me some nasty post at the bottom of this video. But if you're going to change it at 1 hour, put break-in oil back in it. Put in a petroleum-based oil. It does not have to be something that's labeled break-in oil. It can just be a 10W50 engine oil that's petroleum-based. Maxima has one. I mean, there's a bunch of them out there. So then it says change your oil after every 15 hours. So this column right here goes up to 15 hours. So 15, 30, you know, on up the line, they're saying to change the oil. Okay, but the problem with that is not everybody's using their bike the same way. Not everybody rides the same way. And so there's a lot of exceptions to that 15-hour marker they're giving you there. You know, if you're riding a snow bike, for you guys who've never ridden one, on a 450 or 500, you're riding them like a 125. You're revving the guts out of those things all day long. So 4 or 5 hour rev the guts out of your 500, I would change it after those 4 or 5 hours. If it's a 250 or 350, you're out on the track, and you're like a SX model, you're revving the guts out all day long, banging it off the rev limiter, change it after 4 or 5 hours. If you ride like my grandma, well, then maybe you can go 25 hours. You know, you just kind of got to figure out how you're treating your bike, what you're using it for, and when you drain the oil, feel it, see if it's broken down, or if it still feels like it, you know, it has some body to it. Smell it. If it's kind of burnt smelling, that's a really good indicator that you're slipping your clutch too much. You know, maybe you were using a recluse auto clutch and you had it too tall of gear all day long, and you're slipping the clutch and you've burnt the oil at that point. If it's got a burnt smell, the oil is trash. So there's lots of exceptions to that. 15-hour rule they're giving you here. You just kind of have to figure out what works for you and go from there. So a couple other service schedule things that they have here, which I have to pick a bone with. So right here it says service the fork at 10 hours, service the shock at 20 hours. So now wait a minute here. Forks hold typically 1,000 to 1,100 cc's of oil. A shock, I've rebuilt thousands of shocks in my career. I've never measured how much oil I was putting in because that's not how you do it. You fill them up. But I'm going to say a shock holds around 250 cc's. And a shock works, you know, is doing the work of 2 forks. So it's working a hell of a lot harder. You know, ride your bike as hard as you can for an hour sometime, pull over and grab your forks. They're cool as a cucumber. You know, forks do not typically overheat. Maybe if you're Marvin Muskin or Cooper Webb, maybe those guys overheat their forks, but the average Joe does not overheat forks. They're out there in the air, they have a lot of fluid in them, they don't really work all that hard, so the fork is not overheating. But after you've ridden that bike hard for an hour, pull over and touch that reservoir right there. But be careful, because you'll burn your finger. Shocks run extremely hot, and that heat breaks down the oil. So this recommendation of changing the shock at 20 hours and the fork fluid at 10 hours makes no sense to me. I mean, that just defies logic. So typically, suspension tuners say change the suspension fluids at 25 hours. And that's what I always do. Now, if you're real anal and you want to have everything perfect, I have nothing wrong with anal, so I'm not bashing anybody, but if you're real anal and you want things really perfect, well, the forks shed a lot of junk in the first few hours. Just little metal particles, and there's a lot of moving parts in there that just have to break in, and when they do, they kind of shed some of their material, and it's nice to get that out of there, because then that's suspended in the oil, and then that can make things wear out quicker. So you can make your decision on that, but I say 25 hours is a good time to change suspension fluids, and at 50 hours you should completely rebuild the forks and the shock. And I know guys are going to say, well, I've got 100 hours on my bike and it's still working great. Well, I got to say BS, because if you change the fluids, you'd realize that it's not working great. So here's a section of the manual which I really have a problem with. It says here, let's see, remove the engine, change the piston, change the valves, valve springs, valve seats. Well, wait a minute, valve seats? Are you kidding me? The valve seats are made in the head. You would have to replace the head to change the valve seats. Unless you know a very talented machinist, they can make new valve seats and machine the old ones out. But this is absolutely ridiculous. Check shafts, change the connecting rod, conrod bearing, and crank pin. Are you kidding me? That's basically change the crankshaft. And they're saying to do this at 70 hours. I know guys that have 15, 20,000 miles on these things, and I've never done any of those things. I mean, that's excessive. 15, 20,000 miles is excessive, but there's a lot of big bore KTM and Husqvarna four-strokes out there with 10,000 miles on them, and they haven't replaced the crankshaft or the piston. And to do it after 70 hours, I mean, that is absolutely ridiculous. So just take your magic marker and put a big X on that page. So guys, that's enough of my ranting today about KTM, about the KTM owner's manual. I hope that those little tips help you out. And like I say in a lot of my videos, don't forget to help out on trail issues. Even go up there with a little shovel and a saw and whatever, trim some branches, fix some erosion places, fix places where goons, dug a big trench with their knobby. Just, do whatever you can to help trails. Go to trail meetings and just participate. It actually feels good. It's not a pain in the butt. And I think you'll enjoy it, and you'll be helping everybody. So that's all for now. Stay safe during these rough days with the COVID-19. Try to abide by your government recommendations and guidelines. Wash your hands, sanitize, stay away from people. But doesn't mean you can't go ride. That's all for now.